Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well. This week we're talking about crisis management, and I have a webinar that I want you all to see that was produced by the Association of Christians in Student Development, and it is led by Dr. Chris Hansen-Kiefer and Kevin Villegas from Messiah College. So I'm going to actually turn that over here for you all to view. I started it a few minutes into the webinar because they're spending some time at the beginning talking about Messiah, providing context, which most of you already have. I do want you to know that I asked for permission for you all to be able to view this. And after Chris and Kevin present, they spend some time in question and answer with the moderator. So I hope that's helpful for you all for this week's discussion on crisis management.
Okay, so I'll start over. There's a co-curricular planning team that exists at Messiah College, which I oversee. And the purpose of this group is listed on this slide, and it's to identify, plan, implement, and assess educational initiatives that meet at least 2 student affairs learning outcomes that Chris just talked about. And also we identify themes each academic year that we try to program around as well. There are 13 individuals in this group, in this team, and you can see who's listed here. The ones that are at the bottom in italics, those are the 4 that come from outside student affairs. We include our Assistant Director of Alumni and Parent Relations, our Director of Sustainability, our Director of the Wellness Program, who's also a faculty member, and the Director of Sustainability is also a faculty member, and also a project coordinator from Human Resources that oversees a lot of our Title IX programming through a grant that we received. So out of the co-curricular planning team, what I realized was having 13 plus members come together when something significant happened either on our campus or off our campus was challenging. So as Chris mentioned from the beginning, this is really about responding in a nimble way. And so we developed these smaller rapid response groups within the co-curricular planning team that they're made up of 3 to 5 individuals. I think 2 groups have 6 members on it, but it's much easier to get together 3 to 6 individuals to address a certain topic or an issue that came up than it is to get 15 people together. So on the slide that you're seeing, we have listed here rapid response groups for mental health and suicide, national global disasters and tragedies, political matters, things related to civil dialogue, things that are related to race, sexual assault, harassment, and sexuality and gender issues. Now, I think it's important to note that these groups aren't the ones that respond via protocol or policies that we have in place. For example, if there is a mental health crisis on campus, or let's say, God forbid, a suicide, this would not be the team that responds to that tragedy. This instead, let's say there was a spate of suicides that happened at colleges, universities that we might want to address, or maybe some high profile suicides that happen in pop culture, in the media, that we want to address. This would be a group then that would come together and talk about whether a response is warranted. So there are times when these rapid response groups would come together and maybe even not come together physically, but just electronically communicate and decide, hey, this is happening either on our campus or off campus. Does this warrant a rapid response? So it means that these individuals are keeping an eye on the media, seeing what's going on, and having a pulse. And so a rapid response meeting could happen from any one of the members that exists in the group. And so before I go any further, I just want to highlight some of the individuals that are on these groups. The way we broke it down is usually by role or expertise, but also if people have a particular passion about something, we've placed them in a certain group. So for example, for, let's see, race related. So if something happens that's related to race, there's a group of 4 individuals, Marcelle Giovanetti, who's a counselor in our Engel Center, and she works with multicultural students. Scott Wang, our Assistant Director of Multicultural Programs. Ashley Schaefer, who oversees our Human Rights Awareness Organization and she's also the director of the Agape Center for Service and Learning, and myself. This group would come together and basically decide whether or not a response is warranted and talk about what type of response that might be. And so in some slides ahead, we'll talk about one particular example so you can kind of see how this plays out. So here, I'm going to go through the next 6 slides are examples of rapid response group programs that came out of these rapid response group meetings. In October of 2015, we had a program called Thoughts About a White Student Union, Why We Don't Have One. And this is the one that I'm going to use as an example to walk us through the timeline later on. Last year in September, we held a program called What's Going On. It was a town hall about race and current events. So the group Race-Related Matters got together after there was a spate of shootings of unarmed Black men by police, and we felt that people on our campus, particularly students of color, were really wanting to have an opportunity to talk about this. And so this rapid response group got together, and we created a program, and it was really well attended. And these were programs that happen typically in the evening. We usually try to structure it by having a panel or some type of town hall because those are relatively easy to pull off. We don't have to worry about bringing in an outside speaker. We have learned some lessons in trying to partner with others across campus and including them in the planning of these programs, and also including them in the programs themselves, such as faculty members who have expertise on a given topic. Another event we did last year in November was called Locker Room Talk, a conversation on sexual assault, language, and people in power. And this was a response to after there was audio and video leaked of then candidate Trump, who made some comments about how he treated women in the past, and then dismissed it as being locker room talk. We felt even before the election results, this was a program that was being planned. And again, this was really well attended, well received. I'll talk a little bit about assessment later on. Okay, and this is one we did earlier this year, and it's called What's Going On with DACA? What is it and why should I care? After the Trump administration announced plans to wind down the DACA program, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, we felt that there were people on our campus, again, who are wanting to have a discussion about this. And we also realized that there were people on campus that might not know what DACA is and why it should matter to them. So a group got together, the ones that discusses political matters and civil dialogue. They got together and decided to put together a town hall. And oftentimes when these rapid response groups come together, they pull in student leaders as well, who have a passion or knowledge about the topic, and get them to catch the vision and to have some buy-in too. So one of our student organizations, Human Rights Awareness, put this town hall together. And then earlier this year, we also did one a couple weeks ago called Sports and Politics, Contextualizing the Take a Knee Movement. Again, a rapid response group got together and felt that our campus was really wanting to have conversations around this topic in particular. So we worked with some of our student leaders in the Human Rights Awareness, in our Black Student Union, in our Student Activities Board, Student Government, and we had a panel presentation in our Student Union where there were different perspectives that were shared on this whole movement. And then we have one coming up this week called the Upper Lobby, a response to the Me Too movement. This is our rapid response group on sexual assault and harassment got together and in response to the Me Too hashtag that was on social media in response to, again, a spate of sexual abuse and harassment, high profile in Hollywood and in politics. They decided to host an event, and this is in compilation with our sexuality and gender education program and also our School of the Arts. It's tied to an art exhibit as well. So now I'll walk you through our first rapid response group. This image is a screen capture of a Twitter account that was owned by a student on our campus. And you can see in this picture, there's some hooded Klansmen and a white gentleman with a rifle and a bandolier and a meme of Morpheus from The Matrix that reads, "What if I told you it's racist to assume white people are racist?" This came to our attention through one of our student leaders, and we felt that, we realized quickly that there were students on campus already engaging with this student via Twitter, and it wasn't going all that well. And so we felt there was a need to respond to this. So how did we respond? This was our very first example of a program coming out of our rapid response groups. So here's a timeline of that incident. You can see on the upper left, as you're looking at the slide, on a Wednesday evening, an administrator was alerted of the account. That very next day, key personnel met, and that included people from safety, people from PR, different people from student affairs, cross student affairs, our chief diversity officer as well. And then by that evening, we decided to hold a meeting with our leaders from BSU, who are feeling rather unsettled by the existence of this account. And then that evening, the rapid response group was notified and a meeting was scheduled. We decided as a result of meeting that an email would go out to all underrepresented student leaders, letting them know that we were aware of the situation and working on it. And then item number 6 there in the center of the slide, by Sunday, an email from the student newspaper, the student newspaper reached out to us to find out what was going on. So there was a hole there. We realized we didn't let all of our student leaders know or our whole campus know. We just let our students of color know. And so there were students across campus thinking that the college was just ignoring this. And so we felt that a broader response was needed. So by that Sunday, we responded to the newspaper with details and an invitation to another meeting that we were holding. That Sunday evening, we met with all underrepresented student leaders. And then by Monday, an email went out to all students letting them know about the existence of the account and what the college was doing in response to it. And then we also realized that email went out to all students. And then by Monday, we were getting comments from employees wondering what we were going to do, wondering if we were even aware of it. So we sent an email to all educators that Monday afternoon. Tuesday morning, the rapid response group met to finalize the program. And by that next Monday, there was a town hall meeting held, which was very well attended with some really good discussion. But this shows you how rapidly we were able to respond to this event. Some of the other events that have happened in the programs as a result were not as rapid as this. It all depends on the situation and what's happening on campus. You would get a better sense of what's happening on your campus and decide how quickly you need to respond. But I think it's probably more appropriate to call our groups our relatively rapid response groups because it all depends on the situation. Now I just want to highlight our educational plans. In student affairs, we use these educational plan templates to help with planning our programs and also assessing our programs. So on these plans, we highlight what the strategy is, what department is facilitating the program, if we're collaborating with anybody else on campus, what student affairs outcomes this program is tied to, and then if there are any departmental student learning outcomes, we list those as well. We highlight the purpose for the program, identify specific student learning outcomes, and then we list other intended goals. We list there on these plans as well resources that are needed. We place an agenda for the program, an outline often, and then we talk about how we're going to assess these learning objectives. And then once it's all done, we plug in all the assessment results, make recommendations for future programming, highlight any artifacts that we use, such as a mass email or a poster, things like that, and we make any notes. That way, if we want to do a program similar to this, we could take out this educational plan and learn our lessons from it. Okay, so using the Take an E program that we just did on our educational plan, the strategy we listed was a rapid response group program, and we tied it to the cultural competence area of our student learning, student affairs outcomes. And that's basically that our students would be able to understand and articulate the importance of including diverse perspectives in relation to their leadership practice. So we wanted students to really understand what it looks like to have different perspectives on a controversial topic. So the purpose of this event was to create an opportunity just to demonstrate and model healthy community dialogue and learning around this issue, sports and politics in general, and the Take a Knee movement in particular. The student learning outcomes that we listed are down at the bottom of this slide on the bottom right. To have greater knowledge of the history of social activism in sports and why it should matter to Christians. To have a clear understanding of the Take a Knee movement as seen from a variety of viewpoints. To understand the different perspectives on the Take a Knee movement, and to feel more comfortable and engaging in this conversation in the future. Here is a quick assessment form that we used for this event. You can see at the top, the program is listed, the date of the event, and then we outlined for all the students that participated the 4 learning outcomes or objectives that I just spoke about. We asked them to rate how well we did at achieving these stated learning objectives. And then we asked them how they heard about the program. That's item should be number 3 there. And then we asked them to list at least 2 significant takeaways from the program and how they could apply those takeaways to areas of their life. And then on the back side, so this is just a half sheet, on the back side we asked them to list how we might improve on this program. All right, so now those are some examples of our rapid response group programs that we've done. And how we plan those programs using our educational plan, and hopefully you got a sense of how we assess those things and try to improve on it. Chris is now going to talk about some things we might want to consider moving forward.
Kevin, I think that it's important to consider your organizational structure. So who, in fact, if you don't have a planning team that is similar to ours, who would be the group that would be making decisions about this? And is there a way that you could pre-organize teams so that they're ready to go when something does happen? I noticed that you could tell in some of the posters that we frequently involve faculty in our programming. They aren't typically part of the rapid response team, but would be invited into a particular program depending upon the expertise that they bring. And I think, at least on our campus, it's been important for students to see curricular and co-curricular educators partnering on relevant topics. You'd want to also decide who's going to communicate and how. Depending upon what communication system works, I think that it's, we would always loop in our upper level administration here. It would be common for me to take a rapid response idea to our president's cabinet and make sure from their perspective it's a program they could be supportive of. It's really another place where those educational plans become relevant, because I can hand those plans to our president and our provost and just say, hey, here's what we've got planned. I want to make sure that you're comfortable with everything from the poster to the learning outcomes to the way that we're going to deliver the program. And that has been important because, as you can imagine, not everybody is always comfortable with the type of issues we're addressing or the way that we're addressing them. And then involving student leaders and organizations. Kevin mentioned that in the beginning, but I think it's a good thing to think of ahead of time. Who are our existing either student clubs and organizations or leadership groups that would have interest in partnering? And if you have a particular structure where those leaders gather together at certain times, I think it's important to loop them in and to have them deeply involved. I'm convinced that our attendance at these has been high for 2 reasons. One, it's relevant and students want to talk about the topics. And 2, their peers have been involved in the planning, and so they've been able to get the word out and invite people to attend. I think it also, you would want to know when administration would need to be involved. I can imagine some rapid response programming that in fact you would want your president to be present and even maybe making a statement either personally or via email. So those are things to really consider. I do recommend some version of the educational plan, not only for the administration, but also to keep you focused. There's oftentimes a lot of emotion wrapped around a particular topic, and if we don't have something to anchor us or keep us focused, like the learning outcomes, the planning, and the purpose, it can easily take a long time to get the events planned.
I'll also add that a program is not what always comes out of these rapid response groups. Sometimes, like let's take, for example, a national disaster or a tragedy, such as an earthquake or a mass shooting. Sometimes our college ministries are already plans to do something in chapel and address it in a different forum, or have a prayer vigil. And so rather than program something on top of what's already being planned, we defer to other areas that are already going to do some programs around it. Or sometimes it's something as simple as recommending to the appropriate person that an email goes out, or that it's somehow addressed in a different way other than a program. So at this point, we breezed through a lot of things, but I think we have Kim available that's going to facilitate a Q&A for us. We wanted to leave a lot of time on the back end to make sure we address any questions that you have, specific questions, and we'll do our best to answer them.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Chris and Kevin. That was excellent information. We only have a few questions that have come in so far, so I would say if you have any questions at this point, go ahead and type them into the text box. Even if other people can't see your questions, we as the presenters are able to see them, so go ahead and send them in and we'll keep collecting them. So one of the basic questions at the very beginning was if the handouts or the slides will be available later. And the answer is yes, we will absolutely do that. I believe too, our webinar is being recorded, so we'll be able to make the recording available there online on the ACSD website later as well. So Kevin and Chris, one of the questions that came up was the question was, are all of your rapid response programs town hall meetings?
That's a great question. Trying to think. So far, they mostly have been. The one that's coming up this Wednesday is not. It's more of a contemplative kind of reflection that's tied to an art exhibit that has some bearing on the Me Too movement. And so that is an example of one that is not a panel or a town hall type discussion. But typically we found that those work rather well when we do have a town hall, because students are wanting to talk about it. So that type of forum gives them the opportunity to ask questions or to speak their mind in an area where there's been some ground rules laid, and also some experts or quasi-experts on the topic have addressed it already and shared some of their thoughts. And so there's been some really good dialogue that has come out of those town hall type formats. And so we plan to stick with those still as long as they keep working. And again, if you want to respond rapidly, to do another type of program, such as bring in a speaker from off campus, that sometimes could get a little difficult. But we have included outside folks on our panels when that was appropriate and when we were able to.
That's great, and this next question is actually a good follow-up to that one. Someone asked if you always have faculty members as a part of the panels at the programming, and I would even chime in just based on what you just said and add, and when you're trying to put these together quickly, how do you then work with everyone's crazy busy schedules and actually find the right people to be on your panels?
Yeah, that's challenging. In fact, the last town hall meeting that we had on Take a Knee, it was particularly challenging to get faculty to participate in that. So it is true, though, that faculty, we know faculty have an expertise or a passion about a particular area. And I think that it's good practice to bring in not faculty for faculty's sake, but faculty because of their expertise on a particular knowledge area or because of their study or discipline. So when it's appropriate and seems natural, we will do that. It isn't always the case that's appropriate.
Great, thank you. There's a question here about PR. You mentioned that earlier. How much ongoing interaction do you have with your PR office or your marketing department? How does that influence what you do and what you don't do?
That's one of the reasons that I always will mention these at President's Cabinet. The the VP that's over PR and marketing sits on cabinet, and we have a good communication that way. Kevin is also often in touch with that office. So it's a fairly collective decision on not necessarily would we address it, but how we address it. We would loop PR in. I think the point that Kevin made about keeping it with internal educators helps a lot with the PR also.
Great, thank you. One question that came up is, one concern that comes up often from administration is that discussing these controversial subjects can be divisive or cause division on campus. Can you speak a little bit to that? How do you use these events to draw people together rather than dividing more on your campuses?
I'll start and then I'll let Kevin finish that. The truth is, students are talking about these topics and it's dividing them anyway. So I think we've opted to enter the conversation rather than to shy away from it. But I'll let Kevin speak to the rest of
that. I agree with exactly what Chris shared. When we do these programs, we get the sense that our students are already wanting to talk about this. So it gives us an opportunity to actually model for them how to have these conversations and have them well. And sometimes we learn a lot from the students that engage in these programs as well, and see how well they handle it. And so we found that it's important to just create a space. I think it communicates a lot to our students that we care to have dialogue on our campus, rather than just bury our head in the sands and pretend like it doesn't affect our community. And so I think there's also just significance with creating the space for students to have the conversations in a way that's mediated in typically a public forum where there's been, like I mentioned, some ground rules that have been laid, and some educators that are hopefully modeling how to share their perspectives and maybe disagree with other panelists or presenters on their perspectives, but do that in a way that shows that you can still maintain civility.
Another question that's come in is, do you have any examples of a rapid response program that has not gone well? And if so, what did you learn from that experience?
Well, some feedback from the town hall that we did on DACA was that it was very one-sided, that there was a lot of sharing there were 2 faculty members on there and someone from outside of our campus community. And it was also put on by our human rights awareness. And so I think in the planning, this wasn't intentional, but I think everyone happened to see the issue the same way. And so there was some feedback on the assessment forms afterwards that there was only one perspective really shared on immigration at that town hall. And so there was, we like to learn lessons from our failure as much as our successes. And so when we were planning our next rapid response group program, the one on the Take a Knee, we realized that all the people planning that saw that issue very similarly. So we were very intentional then about reaching out across campus to students and faculty who were able to offer a different perspective. And then we included them as early as possible in the remainder of the planning and in the panel itself. And so I think, like I said, we learned lessons from our failures, and there are always things that are identified as that we could have done better from each of these programs.
Another question has come through that's very related to that, and that is, as you're looking at trying to diversify and get panels that represent all sides of a perspective, are you ever challenged on a small campus finding all perspectives represented? What if there's an issue and everyone you talk to really sees it one way? Have you ever faced those kind of challenges?
Yeah, we actually were just discussing that the other day. It is challenging, and I think that my perspective on that would be, if we're good educators and our faculty are good educators, they ought to be able to represent a position that's different than their personal position to help balance out a conversation. So in talking to Kevin about our last one that we had, I think that when possible to do some prep with the panel or the speakers ahead of time to make sure that we're accomplishing that is important. So that's kind of another lesson learned, to be able to talk graciously and intelligently about a variety of perspectives.
Thank you, Chris. So when you're identifying off-campus conversation partners, those times that you do reach beyond your campus on specifically relevant issues, do you have protocols for doing that as you're working with folks that are not associated with the college?
Well, we do have any student club or organization, so if they're involved in a program on campus, they know that they have to fill out an off-campus speaker request form. And typically it's just a formality, depending on the program and depending on the speaker. It could come up the chain of command, so to speak. I get all of those requests and I typically approve them with no problems, but every now and then if it's something that's controversial, or whether it's the topic or the speaker, it might go through some more stringent vetting. But for the most part, when there are educators already involved in planning these rapid response group programs, it's typically someone that we will have a connection to and already know that will do a good job of representing themselves well. And so, like for example, the DACA program that we did, there were already some on the planning team that knew of someone that works with refugees that can come in and share about the immigration process for refugees. When we did a town hall on the police shootings called What's Going On, I have a friend who's African-American, retired Pennsylvania state trooper, who I reached out to, and he came and gave a police perspective on the shooting, but he was also able to offer his perspective as an African-American man growing up in Philly, and some of the issues that he had with police growing up in Philadelphia. So he was able to offer a very unique perspective, but that's because of the personal relationship that I had. And so that's typically for these types of programs, when we do feel like we could bring in an outside voice, it's usually because we already have a relationship.
Yeah, I don't think that these rapid response programs are a time to take a risk on a speaker. I mean, you want to be as confident as you can that the speaker fits your institution and your mission, because usually the topic is risky enough without inviting a speaker that's also risky.
That's a great point. There's a couple logistical questions that have come up, more of the nuts and bolts. So one is related to funding. The question is this: in setting up this team, would you recommend dedicated funding to be identified? If not, where have the funds come from, if any of your programs have needed funding?
That's a great question. I do have some budget money in my area that I allocate for a co-curricular planning team. And then when we're partnering with other organizations, and sometimes they're student clubs or organizations, they will also have funding. So if it's going to be an event that costs something, we usually try to figure out how we're going to split the expenses. Sometimes there are no expenses involved. And that's typically the case when we pull off these town hall type programs quickly. It's just a matter of reserving the space, getting a tech crew, which doesn't cost us, neither of those things cost us anything, and posters, which is minimal. So I don't think we've yet to pay an honorarium to someone coming from off campus. So far we've been able to do them relatively on the cheap, so to speak.
Now, you just mentioned room reservations. When you're trying to pull these programs together rather quickly, how do you quickly find event dates and times that are available? We all know how busy our campuses get. There's so many student events and activities. Do you have kind of a time slot that's earmarked specifically for these events, or do you just look at the calendar and try to pick whatever's available?
It's really looking at the calendar first to see what else is going on, because we don't want to step on other programs that are already happening, or a busy time of the week. Like for example, Thursday evenings, we have student-led worship called Powerhouse, and our student government, student senate meets, so we try to avoid doing something on Thursday evenings. If we know that there's for example, the Take a Knee movement program, we also worked with our coaches in our athletics department, and they wanted a lot of their students to attend, so we pushed it back and held it later in the evening on a night when there were no games scheduled. and practices were done, so coaches could encourage their teams to go to that event. So we really try to take it case by case to see, work around, if there's a particular person we want on as part of the program, we'll work around that person's schedule. Sometimes we need to push things back. The Take a Knee program we wanted to have earlier, but there just wasn't an opportune time or space to do that, so we pushed it back a little bit. So sometimes if you have to make some accommodations based on what you're really after.
The questions just keep coming, and they're great, so I'm just going to keep going. We have a few more minutes here. Another one here is, what have you found to be the most effective ways to communicate with students that you're working on a response, that kind of an email? Or do you do it via email? Do you do it in chapel announcements or posters? How do you let the community know we're aware, we're on it, we're doing something about it?
Yeah, I can start at the higher level, and then I'll let Kevin talk about with students. It would be typical for Kevin and I to talk early on, hey, do you think we should pull together a rapid response? And then for him to pull together the group just to decide whether or not we want to do that. At that point, I would be communicating with other student affairs directors and administration on campus to let them know, hey, we're working on it. And we don't blast that out 5 minutes after we decide, but we certainly let people in leadership roles know so that they can communicate that with their student leaders.
Yeah, I'll add that getting students involved in the planning also gives them buy-in, it gives them some ownership, and then they start talking about it with their peers, and a lot of communicating happens just by word of mouth for student leaders. It also depends on the nature of the program and the response, but typically we found that we were able to get out mass emails pretty quickly, and that is a way that a lot of students, based on our assessment forms, because we ask how they found out about it, is through mass email. And we also have a graphic designer that works in our student activities board that's able to turn around posters pretty quickly, and hopefully you're able to see the quality of the posters that we created as part of some of our programs. But it's just really not just one avenue, it's multiple avenues, and just finding what will work best.
Great. Kevin, you mentioned your posters, and I'll just say personally, I noticed they were amazing. Did you say that's a student graphic designer who did those?
Yes, the students can give us quicker turnaround typically.
That's fantastic. So another question that seems pretty realistic, that it says, have you ever had to rein in a conversation during one of these programs? Do you have a specific plan for how to handle a potential escalation that occurs?
I wouldn't say that we have a plan in place. I think what we have going for us is when we do have these events, there's typically multiple educators that are present. We have some just really fabulous student leaders that also do a good job of keeping the conversation on track and redirecting if necessary. I've seen that happen. But for the most part, I would say for all the programs that we've done, people have remained relatively civil and calm. I remember our very first one that we did with the White Student Union. There was, and this was a great moment, I think, there was a female African-American student who raised her hand and said, I have a white friend who is afraid to ask this question, and so I'm asking on her behalf, but where do white students go if they feel that they want a safe place to talk? And I just thought that was a really great example of students just caring for one another and modeling what it means to share what they're thinking in ways that are received. And so fortunately, we've not had any conversations really get derailed or go badly.
Just to add to that, the student leaders, as Kevin mentioned, have been outstanding. And I think that's because the advisors of the particular clubs have invested in them and have modeled and taught them well how to pull these off. We have a student moderator who's done 2 of these this year, and honestly, she outshines the educators sometimes in terms of her ability to represent perspectives and to hear people. So I think investing in our student leaders and then partnering with them on these is critical.
Yeah, and I'll also add to that, that same student leader that Chris just talked about, I think these students are seeing how we do these things and they're modeling it. Right at the beginning of the year, this student, along with 4 other student leaders, got together and they basically responded rapidly without knowing that's what they were doing to what happened in Charlottesville. And they put together a panel conversation that she moderated, followed by a prayer vigil. That was just so, it was just done so well, and everyone was impressed. And there were no educators involved in that planning at all.
Great. Speaking of student care and student facilitated programming, a couple of questions have come in related to that. So one in particular is, what is your follow-up that you do following these initial events? And then I'll say this other one too, and you can speak to both of them. The other question is, what space has been made or culture has been established to increase students' comfortability sharing their thoughts and feelings about these major events apart from the rapid response program? So one is kind of, how do you help students in their care after the program, and another is, outside of these programs, how do you create the space or the culture so students feel comfortable? And it sounds like some are taking initiative on their own, which is exciting, but other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll speak to the student care piece, and then I'll let Kevin again respond to the other piece of that. That's one of the reasons that I really loop in our directors in student affairs, and if at all possible, ask them to attend the events. It's hard to respond to students if we haven't heard what the students have heard. So encouraging them to attend and then do follow-up. So residence life is a big part of that. Student government and leadership in the Agape Center, I would say, for our service programming, all of them at a variety of ways. Multicultural Council have hosted space for follow-up, and the directors, maybe who were not involved in the rapid response but had been participating in the event, are there for follow-up.
Yeah. Can you repeat the question one more time?
Well, the one was about, the follow-up right after the events. The other one is, what kind of space do you create outside of the rapid response events that allow students to feel safe enough to bring up these issues?
Yeah, I'll just echo what Chris shared in letting the directors know about programming that's happened. I also try to do a good job of that, of letting my colleagues know. So we have a wonderful Res Life department and wonderful student leaders in there. And so oftentimes, if they know well enough in advance, RDs will let their RAs know about certain programs that are important to try to attend. And sometimes RAs will make it a floor event where they will go together to a particular program, and those RAs will help facilitate conversation on their own afterwards in a more organic sense. And also with the example of the Take an E movement program, our coaches, we had already been working with our coaches to help have conversations with their teams, and some of our student athletes were leaders on their teams to facilitate conversations within their teams. And so not only did we do that program, but we also prepped the coaches and the student athletes to keep these conversations happening in their own spheres of influence.
Okay, I think we have time for just a couple more questions and then we'll wrap it up. So one question here was, how do you decide, with all that's going on in society, which events are critical enough or important enough to move forward with a rapid response program? I know you mentioned a minute ago that you just had students respond on their own. Why was it that the students responded as opposed to you all? Was it just they beat you to it? Or how do you make that determining factor of what should be a programmed response and what shouldn't?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I'm not sure we have a great answer for it, other than if I get a sense, or quite frankly, any educator or employee on our campus or student raises a concern that they indicate they would like to have more conversation about it, and why aren't we doing anything about this, it at least warrants our attention and our conversation to consider. So that's when Kevin would pull together a small group to talk about, kind of what we're hearing, what might be possible and what might not. Is this something the students could run with? Is it something we should be involved in? I don't know that we have a science to it right now. It just involves a lot of conversation and not delaying the conversation. I think sometimes we get so fixated on planning and what might, mess up our plans that it's hard for us to take a quick turn and go against that.
Sad. Like principal to the science to it. I think because I work very closely with student leaders, in particular student government and clubs and organizations, in my relationships with them, I'll pretty much figure out pretty quickly what they're wanting to talk about, what's important to them, and that's really helpful. They serve as a good gauge for us.
Great. And our last question is, what do you do for our distance or our online students? As we know, our modules of education are expanding. And so do you have ways that these programs can reach students that aren't physically present on campus?
Fair question. We don't do any streaming at this point. I think our last one was videotaped and put on YouTube, but of course that would be after the fact. So we don't have anything in the immediate. To be honest, we don't have we don't have any solely online students. So we have residential and commuter.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, and I also see a question on here that's real simple to answer about a sense of how many numbers of students that attend. At our very first white student union town hall, we had well over 100 students attend. At the last one we did, then Take a Knee, there was probably upwards of 200 students in attendance.
Great. And what's your student body again?
2,700.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to go ahead and bring myself back up. Thank you again, Chris and Kevin. We are so grateful for you